freedom, man. That's what it's all about. You've got to groove on freedom, like the good book says.
Welcome. You are listening to What on Earth is Happening. This show will discuss the topics of human consciousness, mind control, natural law, the occult, and all issues that affect the freedom of the people of Earth. What on Earth is Happening will endeavor to shine light upon the darkness of our world and to offer empowering solutions to the problems we face as humanity approaches its critical moment of choice. And now, here is your host, Mark Passio.
Welcome, one and all. You are listening to What on Earth is Happening right here on the Oracle Broadcasting Radio Network. I'm your host, Mark Passio. This show is live every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. East Coast time. That's 4 to 6 p.m. Central time. My website is whatonearthishappening.com. The network's website, oraclebroadcasting.com. Today is Sunday, February 5th, 2012. We have a great show lined up for you here today, and we're going to be having a very special guest on for all 2 hours, starting with the next segment, Mr. Fernando Salguero, who is a water purification expert and a specialist in survival tactics. Fernando is the host of the meetup.com group Survive and Thrive right here in the Philadelphia area, which meets on a regular basis here in Philadelphia to teach survival skills. It's a survival skill sharing group, okay? And on the show today, we'll be discussing techniques and technologies for water purification and the critical role that water plays in our everyday lives. And this is part of our ongoing solution-oriented approaches. Last week, we talked about food, and we're not finished with that topic. We're going to get into it a lot more in coming weeks. Today, it's water purification, and you're going to see that this gentleman is one of the foremost experts on that topic. So that's coming up in the next segment. I do have a couple of quick event announcements that I want to read off. The first thing is that the Red Ice interview with Henrik Palmgren that I did a couple of weeks back is still not posted to the site. I announced last week that it would be posted to Red Ice. It looks like there's a couple of people in the queue for new guests right before me, but if you go to the radio show page on Red Ice Creations, you will be able to see that I'm in the queue. I think I'm third in the list. So look for that in about a week or so, probably. I would say within a few days to a week, but it will be posted there soon. Tomorrow, February 6th, I will be interviewed on the radio show Two Gar One Fee with Franco Huard and his other co-hosts. This is on the Radio H2O network out of Montreal. So check that out. I'll post some links tomorrow for the show. And next week, February 12th, I will be interviewing Franco Huard from the radio show Two Gar One Fee on What on Earth is Happening, and our topic will be present moment awareness. Also, the Truth, Freedom, Prosperity group will be hosting their free documentary screening and discussion night at the end of this month, Wednesday, February 29th at 7:15 p.m. at Media Bureau Studios. Media Bureau is at 4th and Brown in the Northern Liberty section of Philadelphia. This month, we will be screening Michael Tessarion's Architects of Control documentary. So definitely look out for that one. Come on out if you want to learn all about the techniques of mind control and who these architects of this system of control are and what they're all about. That's coming up February 29th at Media Bureau Studios. For more information, visit truthfreedomprosperity.org. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back.
lay asleep, obey. When he looks at it with his eyes, it's what we see. When he looks at it with sunglasses, he's seeing the same things all the way through, the subliminal, symbolically you couldn't see. Obey, no independent thought, don't think for yourself.
I wear my sunglasses at night so I can
Welcome back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthisHappening.com. Let's jump right into it with our special guest for this episode. Fernando Salguero, welcome to What on Earth is Happening.
Thank you, Mr. Passio.
So, we're going to talk a lot about water purification today. We're going to talk about the technologies involved. We're going to talk about what kind of technologies you recommend or don't recommend. But let's start out with you telling the listeners a little bit about your background. You're a big activist. We're getting a little bit of feedback on the line here. I'm not sure where that's coming from, but let's see if we could mitigate that. Okay. You're a big activist. No, it's still... Fernando, are you hearing that feedback? Hello? Not sure if we just lost him. Hold on, folks. We'll try to sort out these technical difficulties. Let's see if I can pick up Fernando. I'll drop him and pick him back up. Bear with us. Fernando, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Okay, great. So, I was saying that you're an activist in the Philadelphia area, and you also host the meetup group called Survive and Thrive, which teaches a big, huge set of survival skills to people completely for free. You meet up very often in the Philadelphia area in the Northern Liberty section of the city at Liberty's Pub on a bi-monthly basis, I believe it is. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your background and how you got involved in doing what you do now?
Okay. Simply put, I was born to a junkie of a single mother. I was dragged from shitty house to shitty house, often living in squalid conditions, often with no heat in the wintertime, living as squatters a lot of time. No heat in the winter, no running water, no electricity, obviously no telephone. So I had to, at an early age, really deal with a lot of violence, both from within and without the home, inside and outside of the home. Because I was very much a loner and an independent thinker, I was frequently targeted for violence in some of the worst neighborhoods in the city that we lived in. So I've been on my own since I was 15. Thankfully, with the judicious medicine work, the usage of LSD as medicine, I've been able to rewire my neural network, elevate my consciousness, and I have been a do-gooder of one sort or another since I was 15 or so, and I've somehow always tried to champion the underdog. So working with environmental groups, political groups, I've done a lot of homeless outreach and animal work and just a lot of stuff that I just try to make it a better world than what I was born into.
And that's ultimately what it's all about, is taking action and getting involved, not just learning about the things that are wrong with this world, but taking tangible measures to correct those wrongdoings and to actually bring balance about through our actions. It's all about ultimately taking action. I could tell you Fernando definitely does take action. So let's get into what got you into your current line of work. You work in water purification.
What I was just explaining was that my do-gooder, whatever it was, Savior complex, Christ complex, however Christ consciousness, whatever it is that I'm striving toward, brought me into working for Clean Water Action, which is an environmental political group working to hold politicians accountable for their actions, help make polluters clean up their own messes. That's where I got my start in water testing and understanding the dynamics that happen within water,
Right.
understanding broader issues with water chemistry, or the chemistry that goes into water these days. So that really broadened my understanding. About 15 years ago, I began to work for a water treatment company, and my vocation is I am a water treatment specialist. I have a laboratory of my own, self-employed, and what I do is I go out, I test people's water for a wide variety of contaminants, and then help first off diagnose what the problems are, and then tailor a solution and help set them up with a solution.
Great. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about what kind of contaminants currently exist in water that we turn on our taps every day? What kind of contaminants are in there in the water that we shower in the water that we drink, in the water that we use to cook, etc.? What are the kinds of contaminants that exist in water?
Well, I think at this point it would be prudent to take a step back from that, Mark, and really take a look at what water is.
Sure.
Because water has, as all things do, physical and metaphysical properties. And they're not clearly understood one way or the other exclusively, but they really have to be understood in combination. So some of the physical properties of water include essentially all that water ever does is carry different forms of energy through space. Now you think about that for a moment. Different forms of energy through space. It carries. So it carries matter. When we wash our hands, brush our teeth, flush our toilets, water is carrying things away for us.
Right.
If we're hot on a summer day and we sweat, our DNA uses water to dissipate the heat. We cool off, or we jump into a pool, and instantly all that thermal energy is dissipated, carried away. Now, the human body is made 70% of water, but the brain itself is 90% water. Now, this is not insignificant. The planet itself is covered 70% of water. And as current science understands it, water itself is extraterrestrial. Now, this is important. As science currently understands it, the Earth was a molten iron spinning with what we would call magma, and it was just this angry, boiling rock.
Fernando, hold it right there. We're coming up to a break. We'll continue this on the other side. Our special guest for this edition of What on Earth is Happening, water purification expert Fernando Salguero. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. Fernando, you were getting into what water actually is.
Nature of water and its...
Yes, what it does and the possible origins of water on this planet. So why don't you continue with that?
Okay, so very simply, the Earth was a spinning ball of iron and magma. The collection of, if you follow the Big Bang Theory, or at least to one degree or another, this is all the stuff of stars. So part of the manufacturing of our sun, of our star, there's byproducts that include H2O comets. And in fact, the water comets, the ice comets, smacked into the Earth, cooling the surface of the Earth to a crust while it's still keeping it boiling on the inside. The steam process combined with the electromagnetic force of the spinning iron in the center of the Earth created what we know to be the levels of our sky, the atmosphere, ionosphere, stratosphere, on out from there, the blanket. So all forms of life that we know of on Earth require water to live, and water itself did not come from the Earth itself, so it is by definition extraterrestrial. So again, water only has one basic power. No matter what it's doing, it is moving different forms of energy from one place in space to another place in space, whether it's thermal energy, bioelectrochemical, and this is where we need to talk about DNA and the role of DNA. DNA is a living code that takes food, matter, and uses water to rearrange those molecules to create new cells. So we all know that we shed hair and skin cells. We shed billions of skin cells a day. But we don't think about so much the fact that we're also shedding heart cells and liver cells and kidney cells and bones. So our DNA is constantly self-replicating these codes. It's a self-replicating code, and it uses water to distribute. Now, it uses water to carry the good stuff through us, like oxygen, nutrients, antibodies, but it uses water to carry the toxins and waste out of us. Also, it uses water through the central nervous system. So the brain, again, is 90% water because of its conductivity, to be able to communicate, to travel with electrical signals, chemical signals. We are this big biochemical mechanism. So understand that water carries things, and that it starts to do that on a molecular level, H2O. Now, that's a very difficult level for most folks to imagine how small that really is. But water has some very interesting properties, and one of those properties is it has no choice but to erode things, dissolve things, put things into solution. And so water always, on the Earth, water always follows a path of least resistance. So when it rains, rain hits the ground, snow melts, and it will creep along, and it'll either go rivers, lakes, streams. It'll be all surface water, or if it's easier, it soaks underground, becomes groundwater. But anyone who's ever had a leak in the basement or a leak in the roof knows that water will find a way. So the contaminants that are picked up now are very different than the contaminants that people have dealt with for millennia. We're no longer just drinking out of puddles and streams, dealing with natural rock, dirt, and even natural biological issues.
Right.
We're dealing with a lot more complex chemistry, more complex than most people can actually wrap their minds around. A few things that we should think about. The number one cause of water pollution in the United States alone is nitrate contamination. Now, they're all rotting organic materials, things that once were alive but are no longer, and they're decaying. So that can be leaves and sticks, but also most of the nitrates in the U.S. water supply are coming from human and animal feces. Animal feces, let's look at factory farming. Hog farms, dairy farms, chicken farms that pack mainstream Americans, refrigerators. All that manure is constantly running off. It's considered farm runoff, so they don't have to clean up the chicken poo. And so there's a lot of nitrate contamination from that. Also, we all flush our toilets. And so when the water comes, our sewage water is cleaned basically the same way all over the country. They run the water through different sized net filters to take out larger chunks from the sewage. Then they run the water through gravel filters. Then they run the water through sand filters. They pour a few other chemicals in, including chlorine, kills off all the fecal coliform and the gut bacteria. And then our treated sewage water, cleaned to minimum federal standards, is released downstream, and it goes on downstream to other folks. Thing is, we all live downstream from someone else. So their sewage water and everything that goes into it has an impact. So human and animal feces, number one cause of water pollution. Second largest cause of water pollution in the United States are household cleaners. Soaps, detergents, lotions, shampoo, cleansers, conditioners, toilet bowl cleaners. So most folks don't think about the Tilex content of their water how many scrubbing bubble chemicals from DuPont are getting into their pasta and their rice when they boil it. A lot of people think that boiling water makes things disappear, but it doesn't. It just cooks germs to be dead. So household cleaners, second biggest cause of water pollution. The fastest growing form of water pollution in the United States are pharmaceuticals. Now, Mark, you've heard of you've heard of drugs in the water before, haven't you?
Of course. We've actually talked about this on the shows that we did on food and drugs, talking about how the overuse of these different pharmaceuticals ultimately makes its way into the water supply, and then we end up drinking that and taking in those in lower dosages, but chronically over a long period of time.
And what's your understanding as to how the pharmaceuticals get into the water in the first place?
I don't really have too much of an understanding of that. Why don't you enlighten us, myself, and the listeners?
Well, a lot of folks are under the misconception that it's old pills that get flushed down the toilet when they expire. But the reality is that most people ingest their drugs. And so, again, with humans and animals, you got to think about big agriculture.
Right.
Big agriculture uses antibiotics to cut down pus content in the milk supply, or cut down on different kinds of diseases. Also, steroid use is rampant for commercial agriculture. But what people take on a daily basis, I mean, hormones, steroids, birth control, antibiotics, antipsychotics, antidepressants. Today alone, on this day, there are tens of millions of children in the United States that are taking some sort of psychotropic for ADD, or autism, something under the autism spectrum. So Ritalin or Adderall or Abilify, there's a lot of them. And every time those kids go potty, they urinate all the drugs out. All drugs pass through the humans and animals that ingest them. So that's important. Now, when the drugs come out of our bodies, they either come out metabolized, which is broken down to smaller parts, or they pass through unmetabolized, and our excretory system just pushes the drug out whole. Now, there are no long-term studies on chronic low-dose exposure, but the reality is that there is chronic low-dose exposure on the American people for all pharmaceuticals. Another interesting point is the body within the federal government that is supposed to look out for our best interest, the EPA, actually, they set the maximum contaminant levels for what's in public drinking water. And through the very aggressive lobbying efforts of the pharmaceutical companies, those pharmaceuticals are never sought for in the maximum contaminant level.
Fernando, hold it right there. We're coming up to another break. Ladies and gentlemen, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more from Fernando Salguero talking about water purification.
I was born, a shotgun in my hands, behind the gun, I'll make my final stand, yeah, and that's why they call me.
Welcome back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. Let's jump right back into it with water purification expert Fernando Salguero, who was discussing contaminants in our water and how they get there.
So we just touched briefly on the pharmaceutical aspect that is actually kept off of the national radar by the pharmaceutical lobby. The EPA and, it's the same with the relationship between Monsanto and the FDA. The EPA and large polluters have a lot of people in common and a lot of interests in common that don't include necessarily the health of the people as a whole.
Yes.
So there's that aspect of it that we should be mindful of. And then in addition to that, you have every other thing. I mean, each of our cars and trucks, all of us who drive fossil fuel run vehicles, all that fuel we put in one way, all those thousands and thousands of gallons over the years, all of it doesn't just disappear. It just breaks down to smaller parts and goes up into the atmosphere. So in the United States alone, from our cars and trucks, we put tens of billions of tons of heavy metal laden, toxin laden smoke into the air, and all that gets rained out. Because again, water only has one power. Now, for as long as it has rain, water has purified air. That is the natural order on this planet. That water purifies air, pulls the pollen, pulls the dust out. So now it's pulling out all the pollutants from our manufacturing. The commercials running there for Fukushima, and a lot of the filters that sell on radio shows oftentimes don't actually perform as well as you'd like them to. I've tested big Berkey water filters, and they've consistently come up lacking. I've tested a wide variety of filters that get sold, like Brita pitchers, refrigerator filters, faucet-mounted filters, and they consistently mislead the American people by improving taste and odor. Unfortunately, that's where most people's consciousness lies. Is they believe that if they can see a difference, smell a difference, taste a difference, then there is a significant difference, and there's not. The majority of those filters the brand filters that I just rattled off, do little or nothing to remove many of the contaminants. They just improve taste and odor. And so the American people are often suckered by their aesthetics. So you have insecticides and pesticides and all the trash that any of us has ever thrown away. It's sitting in a landfill somewhere. If it didn't go to a trash to steam plant where they burned it, then it's sitting in a landfill somewhere. And landfills are big holes in the ground, and they have liners on the bottom of them. And those liners have holes in them, so that the water itself does not fill up in the landfill and make a big few days of rain, and your average landfill could turn into a big stew pot of human trash, and all that, the batteries and paint cans and baby diapers and everything. So what happens is landfills have holes to allow the water to strain out. So leaking landfills, leachate it's called, is a huge source of water pollution. And then, we just keep throwing our trash away. They come along once or twice a week, pick it up, and we don't have to see it. It's out of sight, out of mind, but it's not out of our reality. And so I think that more and more people are becoming aware through the good works of people like yourself, and there are others that are out there working to improve the state of consciousness for mind, body, and soul. And in my own small way, that's what I also try to work to do is help improve consciousness.
Excellent. Fernando, can you address things that are deliberately added to the water supply in municipal water systems? And after we address those things, I want to talk about solutions. What technologies would you recommend, and how those technologies actually work to effectively filtrate water? So talk about things that are deliberately added to municipal water supplies.
Okay. Well, the one that obviously is going to come to mind, especially for listeners of this show, would be fluoride. Okay, so sodium fluoride is a molecule that will attach itself to what are called caries, the microscopic cavities on the enamel of the teeth, and will actually essentially work like a bit of spackle over a small hole in a hole in the wall. So a small hole can be spackled over, and it won't continue to grow bigger and bigger. So there's surface contact benefit for fluoride with the enamel of the teeth. Unfortunately, Alcoa, a large aluminum manufacturing refining corporation, back in the 50s, realized that there were some studies that linked fluoride to the benefits to the teeth. What they did is they hired Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, and they wanted to sell their waste product. You see, when they mine aluminum out of the ground, they have to separate the pure aluminum ore from other impurities that include sodium fluoride, which is so highly toxic. It's actually more toxic than lead. And so they hired a PR firm that hired a bunch of dentists and helped to rewrite textbooks to sell sodium fluoride to be put into the water supplies for the American people. Over time, we've seen that there's been negligible impact on the dental benefits. In fact, the American Medical Association has actually recently come out to remove fluoride from the water for infants and toddlers, because it is not a vitamin. Fluoride does not ever help the DNA. Doesn't put fluoride to use. The DNA does whatever it can to get rid of it, but through the excretory system. But the damage that can be done, the carcinogenic, the impact of fluoride is intense. It's related to bone cancer, and there are also other studies that show that fluoride calcifies the pineal gland. Now, the pineal gland is key because it is, in fact, the physical manifestation of our third eye. And the pineal gland is loaded with rod and cone cells. It's one of the most complex chemical manufacturing plants in the brain. It is not fully understood by science at this point in time, but it is very important. And I personally believe that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul, the connection port in which the eternal consciousness, divine spark of consciousness that we all are riding a wave of some sort, where it actually plugs into the meat suit. I believe that the pineal gland is the seat of the soul, from which the mind is operated and then the body is operated. So,
I totally agree, and that's why this attack is ongoing. This deliberate attack is ongoing against the awakening of consciousness by trying to damage and hold back the pineal gland within the brain, and that is done. One of the methods that is done through is the fluoridation of water supplies.
Right, and the fact that if you take a look, it's not really divergent from our topic. If you take a look at the federal schedule of illegal substances, on the Schedule 1, the most illegal substances are those that empower the mind. LSD, DMT, which is manufactured, dimethyltryptamine, is an endogenous brain chemical manufactured most likely by the pineal gland, also may be manufactured in the lungs. But dimethyltryptamine is an incredibly important neurochemical that is linked to human consciousness, and I personally believe is the master key for unlocking human consciousness. But so Schedule 1 drugs include LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, and DMT, whereas then the Schedule 2, not quite as illegal, are the ones that hurt us the most and often get imported by the CIA, FBI, other alphabet soup agencies for covert funding and whatever it is that they're doing. But the coke and the heroin that get funneled into inner cities, the fact that we're guarding and poppy production in Afghanistan has jumped. I believe it's now at 700% from before we invaded Afghanistan.
Incredible. Fernando, we're coming up to another break. On the other side, I'd like you to address chlorine and chlorine derivatives as contaminants in water. Great. Stay with us, everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening with our special guest, Fernando Salguero. We'll be right back after these words. Welcome back. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Today on the show, we are talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. And Fernando, we were talking about all of the different contaminants in our water. We just kind of wrapped up talking about fluoride, but I wanted you to touch on chlorine and chlorine derivatives.
Sure. The two main, first off, when your city tap water is treated, what they do is they take it from the source, whatever river, lake, stream. They run the water through different sized net filters to take out leaves, sticks, trash, and animals. You'd be surprised how many, aside from the wild animals, actually a lot of pets. When folks don't have the money or inclination to bury their animals, or if the vet bills are too much, the water treatment, the guys who work in the plants, that's what seems to freak them out the most, is the stream of cats and dogs that they see. So they run the water through net filters, then they run the water through large gravel filters, then through fine sand filters, and then they pour in a disinfectant. Most of the time it's chlorine. Chlorine is a very powerful toxic chemical that will kill microorganisms. And this is a cheap and easy way to sterilize the water. And water sterilization is important. I mean, on an average day on this planet, there are 34,000 babies that die, usually from dysentery or diarrhea. They get a case of diarrhea. Their mothers can't stop from drinking infected water. Okay, microorganisms that are attacking a small, undeveloped immune system. And so the babies can't handle it, and they often die in their mother's arms. That's 34,000 times a day. So water disinfection is important to maintain your homeostasis. How it's disinfected also matters. So chlorine is a cheap and dirty way to do it. It also leaves a strong smell behind. So oftentimes those municipalities that are using, or water companies, many of us don't realize that we're actually paying bills to a company with publicly traded stock. So their profit motives, they do the least amount they can, they charge as much as they can for it. So after they pour chlorine in, they'll add ammonia, and that will actually help to off-gas the smell. So you don't smell it as much, but there'll still be a lot of chlorine in the tap water. And they put enough chlorine in the line from the beginning to make sure that even with dissipation, there's plenty of chlorine at the end of the line. Some municipalities and water companies have switched over to a hybrid chemical called chloramine, and that is basically a bonded chlorine and ammonia molecule. Also disinfectant. Now, there are a lot of other ways to disinfect water. Sunlight, ultraviolet light filters, ozonation is a safe and healthy way to do it. But in the United States, at least, we are grandfathered in with old and dirty ways to get things done.
As I understand it also, Fernando, chlorine is one of the things that will damage the lining of the arteries and create heart disease by making molecules such as cholesterol stick into the artery walls. Have you heard this research? Fernando, are you still there? Did we lose him again? All right, hold on. I'm going to drop Fernando and try to pick him up again. I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. Hold on. Bear with us. Fernando, I think we lost you. Are you back?
Hear you louder. How about now? Are you having an issue?
Yes, there you are. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll repeat the question. I was saying, are you familiar with the fact that it is shown that chlorine is one of the most dangerous compounds to put into the body because of what it will do to the arteries, specifically the arteries around the heart, which will become grooved as chlorine molecules pass through the bloodstream, and they will create grooving along the inner walls of the arteries, and that will allow cholesterol, which would ordinarily pass unobstructed through the arteries, to stick in these grooves that are created in the artery walls.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. You're back. Okay. You're fine.
Well, you did a pretty good job of summarizing it right there. That's exactly what happens. The chlorine etches the arterial walls and enables the arterial plaque to build up. and that's what causes the hardening of arteries, which leads to heart attack, different kinds of heart disease. So that's true. Now, another thing that people don't realize is we take more chemicals, especially chlorine. We take more chemicals into our skin with 10 minutes in a hot shower or a warm bath than if we were to drink 1 gallon of tap water. Within 10 minutes, through dermal absorption, we soak in those chemicals. A really neat experiment, you can do this for yourself, is grab a pool test kit, take 2 glasses of warm water out of your tap, and stick fingers down into one of the glasses, like 3 fingers, and let them soak for about 2 minutes. And then you pull your fingers out. Then if you put the equal amount of the OTO, the chemical that turns yellow, with a chlorine test kit, you put equal amounts of that chemical, OTO, into both glasses, you will see that the chlorine is almost completely removed from the glass that had fingers soaking in it for 2 minutes. So dermal absorption is a very real, ongoing reality that our bodies do and deal with. So chlorine absorption, a lot of folks think about their water and their health related just through their what they directly use for consumption, but don't recognize how it relates to their pasta, their rice, their showers, the detergent residue that doesn't get rinsed off properly that's left on the dishes, different contaminants that are on the dishes. People don't see it clearly, and so they don't think about it very clearly as a general rule. There are also things to watch out for in the future. It's my understanding that there are various lobbying efforts to put lithium in the water supply in different parts, and there may in fact already be parts of this country that have lithium in the water. There's also, as I understand it, an effort by the company Eli Lilly, who manufactures Lipitor, the number one selling pharmaceutical in the country. That there's an effort to put Lipitor into the water supply
and this
to help regulate the country's cholesterol level.
Let's clarify for the listeners. This is a statin.
Yes.
And what this does is explain what a statin does and how this is dangerous, because as I understand it, statins decrease the CoQ10 enzyme, and that is what regulates the beating of the human heart.
Yep. Exactly. So there are a lot of, again, you did a good job summarizing. There's a lot of ground for us to cover here.
Sure.
But the statin drugs are excreted through the urine, and so statins are in the sewage water supply, and so other folks are drinking them that way. And then if this move gets through, through lobbying, it might sound crazy to some folks. Oh, how would that ever happen? Yeah, well, we can look at a lot of things that happen that seem crazy, and yet they're going on. There's also one other thing I wanted to touch on with fluoride before we get away from different contaminants.
Sure.
Is that fluoride is a component in a number of antidepressants, including Zoloft and Paxil. Fluoride has been put into the water supply in high doses to control groups of people in the past. It's been used during the Bolshevik Revolution, when they would send folks off to Siberian work camps to keep their heads down, keep their spirits down, keep them off center. Also in the prisoner of war camps in Nazi Germany, the German officers, the German soldiers had a different water supply from the Jews. And it wasn't just because they didn't want to cross-contaminate with, whatever their philosophies were about why they hated Jews, but it was specifically so that the fluoride would not impact the German soldier and interrupt his mastery, and keep the Jews and the communists and everyone else who was rounded up as passive as possible.
That's a great place to take a break. We're going to be back for the second hour, where we will be getting into solutions. Specifically, how can we clean up our water that we drink, that we take into our body, that we shower in, that we bathe in on the other side of this break. Water purification expert Fernando Salguero is our special guest on this edition of What on Earth is Happening. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, folks. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. Today on the show, our special guest is Fernando Salguero, water purification expert and also a specialist in survival tactics. Fernando is the host of the meetup.com group Survive and Thrive. I'll be posting the links for that. Actually, we can give the link. It's actually meetup.com/Survive and Thrive Philadelphia region, but you have to put dashes between all of the words, okay? If you type that into your URL field in your browser, you'll get right to the Meetup page. You could also simply go to meetup.com and do a search for Survive and Thrive Philadelphia, and it will be the first search result returned by meetup.com. So, we got into all of the contaminants in water. In this hour, we're going to be talking about how we can clean up our water, water purification techniques and technologies. Before we do that, I want to give the call-in number because we're also going to open up the phone lines later in this hour for Fernando. So the call-in number to the show is 866-841-1065. Once again, the call-in number 866-841-1065. Give us a call, get in the queue. We'll get to the calls a little bit later after we've had some time to talk about water purification techniques and technologies. Fernando, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the technologies that you recommend that we can employ in order to get these contaminants out of the water that we drink, bathe, and shower in?
Okay, so let's just start by getting a few things out of the way. And those would be Brita pitchers, refrigerator filters, faucet-mounted filters like the Pure, also the big Berkeys. Most of those things will consistently fail. Also, water softeners. Most folks, if you've ever heard of a water softener, what they do is they pour salt into the water. Essentially, there's a heavy sodium residue. It actually generates a level of chlorine. So they're actually not good for people to drink because the elevated sodium over time is related to heart disease, hypertension, these sorts of things. So focusing on what actually works, there are two things you need to pay attention to. One is a very high quality of multi-stage filtration with a backwash. This is important. Any filter that doesn't have a level of backwashing, of separation of clean water and dirty water into different directions, is going to end up failing you, or whether you realize it or not, it will end up failing you. So, for example, the only reliable technology for what's called a physical cleansing of the water, as opposed to the chemical. When you actually break down the water molecules, you can either distill water or treat it through reverse osmosis. Now, reverse osmosis is a set of filters that include very fine paper. Usually, it's a multi-stage, like 3 or 5 different stages for reverse osmosis. And the beginning stages are usually very tight, very tightly wound paper, very tightly spun paper, and carbon filters to remove chemicals. So you have particulates and chemicals coming out, and then it pushes the water through membrane. And essentially, it's like a skin that is tightly wrapped. And only, essentially, at the end of the day, it's only the water molecules that will get through.
Fernando, hold it right there. This is the short segment at the beginning of the hour. We'll pick this up on the other side of this next break.
Not a problem.
talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. We'll be right back.
Chatting online.
Exactly. Get into the chat on the What on Earth is Happening radio show page, folks. We'll be right back after these words. Welcome back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Today on the show, we're talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. Fernando, you were just getting into what reverse osmosis is all about and how it works. Would you like to continue that?
Sure. Now, there are different grades of functionality for reverse osmosis and different grades of efficiency for reverse osmosis. So an inefficient reverse osmosis system will produce 1 gallon of water for every 5 or 6 gallons of wastewater. That's a very inefficient system. Most reverse osmosis systems that you can pick up at big box retailers like Home Depot or Lowe's for a few $100s, generally speaking, they will produce 1 gallon of water and then about 3 or 4 gallons of wastewater. The high efficiency reverse osmosis systems are at a 1 to 1.5 ratio. Now, reverse osmosis, basically, it squeezes the water molecules through these filters that are so small that essentially only the H2O is what actually makes it through. There are incredibly a good reverse osmosis system will remove 99.999% of impurities. Pharmaceutical grade water, which is maybe triple distilled, that's going to be very difficult for your body to deal with, and it will leach out minerals. But basic distilled water and basic reverse osmosis water will not have that negative impact on people's health. That's one of the topics coming up on the chat box here, and we're talking about that.
Great. The RO system that I have installed in my house has a filter that goes down to the 0.0005 micron level.
Yes.
Would you consider that that's something that people really want to look at? How fine of a gradation the filtration filter actually goes down to?
Yeah, those zeros and decimal points really do matter because most microorganisms aren't going to make it past something that is 0.004. 0.04 microns. A micron is 1/10,000th of an inch. So, a micron itself is relatively small. And then when you're getting down to the 0.0s, as long as you have something that cleans better than 0.04 microns for a reverse osmosis system, that's where you want to be.
Great.
So that's good stuff. Now,
Yes.
another technology, just because we're probably going to run short on time here, I want
Sure.
to keep moving. A technology of distillation is very important to understand. Now, there are distillers that you could purchase that will, essentially what you're doing when you're using distillation is you're using the natural physical properties of water. So when water is in its liquid or frozen state, it carries things. When it's in its gaseous state, it doesn't. It will actually release all the matter that it was holding. So you'll see a lot of folks can see if they rinse a glass off in their tap water and just shake it off and let it sit still, the water itself will evaporate. That goes up to the clouds. But the impurities from the water, they're left behind on the glass. So if you hold it up to the light, you have spots on your glass. So when water goes to a gaseous state, it releases the impurities. This is important. So distilled water that you can buy, that's a great way to go. A lot of folks with a lot of health problems, including kidney disease, it's recommended by their doctors to drink distilled water. So distilled water is a very good thing. Now, in a grid down situation or grid teetering situation, for whatever reason, if there is no way for you to get your hands on potable water and you have to refine urine, stream water, just any sort of wastewater can be reclaimed using distillation. So there are different kinds of distillers that individuals can learn how to make. And I would highly recommend that everyone familiarize themselves with the different ways of distilling their own water. Now, one is called a solar still. The solar still uses the radiation of the sun to heat up a closed-in space. Essentially, a very simple solar still is when you were to if you were to dig a hole in the earth that is half as deep as it is wide. So, for example, if I were to dig a 3-foot hole, I'd dig it down to be like a bowl, and at its base, it'd be about 1.5 feet deep. What I would do is then place maybe some black cloth, maybe some T-shirts around and then in the center of that bowl that I've dug out of the ground, that hole, I would place a collecting vessel, maybe a cup. And then I would pour whatever wastewater or urinate on the black cloth. Or you can also pull weeds and grasses and put them in there. Anything that has any kind of water to it. And what you do is then seal it up. You seal it up with a clear plastic, a piece of clear plastic, and you put stones around the outside. Make sure it's covered up with dirt, so there's really no airflow. And then you've got this nice and taut. And then just above the collecting vessel, that little cup on the inside, just above that, you place a stone in the center so that as the heat, the radiation from the sun heats up that, it creates a greenhouse effect. And as it heats up the water and the water evaporates from whatever kind of dirty water it was, it will evaporate and then get caught on the plastic, and the weight of the stone pulls the plastic, points the water flow down into the cup. So after a whole day, you can make several of these, and you can actually have a significant amount of drinking water from the distillation process. Another simple way to do that, if you were to take, and this is a great experiment, anybody can do this at home right now. Take a teapot, place a glass, preferably a taller glass, over top of the spout. Bring the water to a boil. And as the steam comes out, it will touch the glass and it will begin to condense again. And then have another a cup or something to collect that water that comes out from the inverted glass. So that's got 3 parts to it. It's got at the end result, the clean water glass. It's got the glass that is collecting the steam, and then it's got the teapot. So in the teapot, you can put all sorts of dirty water, but at the end of the day, all that you're going to get through the distillation process is H2O. So that will also remove radioactive contaminants, whether it's the radioactive iodine 131 from radium, or strontium from Fukushima, or if you live near a nuclear power plant, if there's ever any sort of a meltdown. Also, chemotherapy patients, they're always excreting radioactive substances to water.
Water distillation, a very critical skill to understand and practice for yourself. We'll be right back with more from Fernando Salguero, and we will open up the phone lines in this hour. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening here on the Oracle Broadcasting Radio Network. We're back, everyone. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. Let me give the call-in numbers once again for anyone that wants to call in and ask any questions of Fernando. The call-in number is 866-841-1065. Once again, 866-841-1065. Fernando, you were wrapping up with water distillation. Was there anything further you wanted to say on that?
Well, there are strengths and weaknesses of both reverse osmosis and distillation. The simple distillation process, the solar still is what I just described for digging the hole, and then there's the stovetop. Now, both of those require a significant amount of time and energy to procure clean water at the end of the day, which may be necessary depending on whether or not you're depending on what the state of your quote-unquote survival situation may be. The downside of reverse osmosis is that it has to be pressurized. So if for any reason the taps stop flowing, if the water companies, for whatever reason, do not provide water to flow out of your faucet, then, there are different modifications you can do to pressurize a reverse osmosis system, but they do need pressure in order to function. If you were to take an RO membrane, that end filter that they use, if you were to unfurl it and maybe stretch it between your arms to make a little bit of a pool, if you poured water on top of that, the water would just sit. The water would not seep through. But if you were to fold it over and over and then squeeze it, then the water would be squeezed through the membrane. So it definitely needs pressure in order to function. And really, people are just kidding themselves with anything else, be it Big Berkey or Brita or fridge filters, or, a lot of folks will say, oh, it's good enough. And the other thing, too, is also the immune system and the excretory system that we have developed. Our DNA does an excellent job of dealing with a wide variety of contaminants. So I know right now you're going through this great super juice diet, and I know you've been vegetarian for a few years now.
Yes.
But you've had more than your fair share of Wendy's hamburgers in the past.
Oh, you know it.
I do know it. I'm going through my own issues and figuring out my own way in this world in that respect.
Sure.
But the fact is that we are resilient creatures.
That's right.
And so, for all the what seems maybe like a little doomsday-ish, all the pharmaceuticals in the water, everybody's peeing out the uranium and whatever it is, these are real issues that we should be mindful of, and we should be mindful of carcinogenic and mutagenic substances, but not to a point where we live in a bubble and we're frozen by fear into inaction, because that's the worst thing, to not do anything. So we ought to have a healthy balance of understanding what the risks and the benefits are for doing nothing, and as well as for going ahead and setting up a reverse osmosis system, ideally.
Exactly. Now, Fernando, you mentioned the juice fast that Barb and I are on. This is day 8 of it, and it is going extremely well. We have great energy. We've stuck to it, and it's definitely opened up a lot of different areas for exploration, and it's definitely shown us psychologically how much we are addicted to certain kinds of food, and even the ritual and the process of eating in general. But it shows us that the nutrient density in juicing that we get from the water that is actually distilled by nature itself within the plant kingdom really has all of the nutrient density that the body needs to survive on a day-to-day basis. So it's been an incredible learning experience. It is the first fast I have ever been on in my life. So this is the first time, and most people will do a 1 or 2 day fast. We just jumped right in and did a 10-day juice fast. This is day 8. We have 2 days left. It's going very well. I want to thank you for reminding everyone of that, and for the support in regards to that. But we do have. Yes.
I gave you your last solid meal.
That's right.
There's actually a question that's come up on the online chat I'd like to respond to, if that's all
Sure.
right.
I was actually just going to pose that. A chatter is asking, what is the best way to store water? So would you address that?
Sure. Okay. Now, when Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. When storing water, there are a couple things you want to bear in mind. One is, if you're storing water, it's for a rainy day. For whatever reason, the taps are not flowing, and so you need to sustain yourself. Just remember that it took the federal government 5 whole days to get water to the 50,000 people that were stranded after Hurricane Katrina in the Superdome. 5 days it took them to get water. So FEMA recommends, for whatever that's worth to the listeners of this show, FEMA recommends that all households in the U.S. have at least 2 weeks of water, food, medicine, and sanitation supplies. For storing water, there's no magic to it. Okay, water does not decompose. Water itself does not go bad. So if it's stored properly, you can keep the microorganisms from growing in it. All right. Now, storing water. Let's just say most folks are going to be starting with tap water that is chlorinated. You can filter out that water. You can store reverse osmosis water or distilled water, but it's not necessary. Okay, I'm going to say that right now. And that's what I do for a living, and I talk to folks about it all the time, about the benefits of cleaning their water. But the reality is that you will die much faster from dehydration in 3 days or so, for most people in most situations. You'll die much faster of dehydration than you will of carcinogenic or mutagenic contamination, which may manifest years, decades down the road. So it's important to keep a certain balance in this. But for storing water, to answer Van from Florida's question, the best thing that you can do is gather food-grade bottles, whether it's from juice or tea bottles. Do not use the cloudy plastic 1 gallon bottles. They will degrade and they will start to leak after a year or so. Don't even buy them in bottled water from the store. If you plan to stash them for a rainy day, don't use cloudy plastic. Use clear food grade plastic. There are different kinds of fillers that are put in there that make the cloudy plastic degrade much faster. So the point is this: when filling, just bear in mind, fill up to what's called the meniscus level. You fill the water up. One of the unusual properties of water, one of the many unusual properties, is that you can fill a cup or bottle, in this case, just to overflowing, and you'll actually see that there's a bubble of water. The water itself will actually bubble over top of the rim of the cup or the bottle that you're filling. So what you want to do is fill it to the meniscus level, so it's bubbled up. You want to get as much air out of the water as possible. That's really where the danger comes in. Because with air, as long as you have chlorinated water or very clean reverse osmosis and clean bottles. Is that background music coming up?
Yeah, that's the music for this next break coming up. Hold your thought right there, and we'll pick up more on water storage after this break. Great. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to What on Earth is Happening with our special guest for today, Fernando Salguero. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, folks, we're back. This is What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. We're talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero on the show today. Fernando, in the last segment, you were getting into water storage and how to effectively store water so that contaminants don't get in it and so that it doesn't leak, and the types of plastic to use or not use, so you can pick it up from there.
Okay. Also, there are a number of questions that are coming up from the online chat that I've told folks I'm going to go ahead and try and answer them. They've asked me to answer them all now.
Absolutely. You go right ahead. That's a great way of taking questions. Absolutely.
So just to wrap up, there's no magic to storing water. Water doesn't go away. As long as there's an airtight, watertight seal, it's not going to go away. So as long as you get as much of the air out as possible, that's ideal. If you want to go the extra step and put a little bit of chlorine bleach, just a minuscule amount of bleach for 1 gallon of water, you shouldn't need more than 8 drops of chlorine. And that will be enough to effectively oxidize. It will kill all of the organisms if there are any. But if you already have chlorinated tap water, just store it that. That itself is shelf stable. Now, another question that's come up: what about food grade 55-gallon drums? Is that a good way to store water? Absolutely. Yes, it is. That's what I do. Me personally, I have a year of water without having to look externally. I can take care of my family for at least 1 year and all of their hydration needs without having to look to rainwater gathering or any sort of purification. That's what I use for the bulk of my stash. Another question that's come up is, what about BPA, bisphenol A, which is a chemical additive in the plastic that mimics estrogen. It's related to cervical cancer and breast cancer in women. It's related to lower testosterone levels from early childhood exposure in men. So men usually come up with lower testosterone, about 70% or so of what their natural testosterone levels could and should be. My response to that, what about the BPA of plastics? It's an acceptable risk. Again, you have to keep things in perspective. And if you're preparing for any level of an emergency, whether it's a hurricane, an earthquake, terrorist attack, Chinese hackers that shut down the grid system on the East Coast or wherever, it doesn't matter. For whatever reason, if the tap stops flowing, you need to hydrate. Even if it's relatively dirty water, it's still going to keep you alive, and you have your immune system and your excretory system working for you. So that's one question. And now another person brought up a question about benzene and other chemicals that are used in fracking. For those of you who don't know, an issue that's going on across the country right now is hydraulic fracking. That is when natural gas companies buy the rights to drill down deep into a mountain and force pressurized water and over 300 different chemicals. And what they do is they actually collect the natural gas from little pockets on the surface. They collect it on the surface, but they've permanently destroyed the water table. They've permanently put these chemicals in. Unfortunately, there are some of those chemicals used in the fracking process that cannot be removed by any means of filtration known to humankind, other than distillation, which is not truly filtration. Reverse osmosis filters, the membranes are actually a fine polymer plastic, and they will melt when they come in contact with some of the fracking materials, with some of the fracking chemicals. So anyone who lives in a fracking area is probably aware of a lot of these things that I'm talking about. But fracking may be something that sickens us on a genocidal level over a long term. We shall see. That's a big issue in Pennsylvania right now, and I know many parts of the country.
Absolutely. I was going to say Pennsylvania is one of the places where fracking is going on the most, particularly in northern Pennsylvania. So, Fernando,
here's another one.
Yeah, sure.
It's been asked.
Go ahead.
Someone was talking about silver. Silver, the metal silver, has a number of very interesting properties, including the fact that it's a natural disinfectant. It's what's called bacteriostatic. So many carbon filters they are silver impregnated. They're soaked in silver nitrate. And what that will do is that will allow the carbon filters to absorb things like chlorine and chloramine, but will not enable bacteria to live and grow in the filter itself. Back in the old days, back during the Depression, when people had milk deliveries, they would put a silver dollar into the bottom of the milk jar to keep the microorganisms from growing. So silver is a very powerful way to disinfect water. You can use colloidal silver. You can also manufacture your own colloidal silver, and it's an excellent way to purge microorganisms, unwanted microorganisms from your body. Silver, colloidal silver has personally impacted me in a very positive way. Not directly related to the water, but silver is a very powerful tool that we have at this point in time and space.
Fernando,
do you have another question, Mark?
Yeah, we do have another question. But before that, I just wanted to reiterate, to clarify for some of the listeners, when you were talking about, adding possible into the storage water when you're storing water, a little bit of chlorine bleach. We're talking about for survival situations. Ideally, we want that removed in our everyday drinking water. But what you're talking about is for survival situations where you want to basically take care of and kill the microorganisms that may happen to be living in water that could possibly make you sick. That is a viable alternative to use that in small amounts so that you basically make that potable and safe to drink, so that you're not going to get sick from the stored water that you're drinking.
That's correct. And again, if it's tap water that's already chlorinated, you're probably best off just storing it that way. And while that may seem counterintuitive, all things being equal, if you take things into account, all the different situations, you're going to be better off with that than nothing at all.
Right. Okay, so we do have a question from our mutual friend, Walt. Walter Rhodes was once a guest on What on Earth is Happening, and he has a question for you. Go ahead, Walt.
Hey, Fernando.
What's up, brother?
If you're in a survival situation where the only kind of water you can access is dirty, mucky, stagnant water, how much bleach would you have to add to a gallon's worth of water, and how long would you have to wait before being able to drink it?
Great question. First off, there are things that you can do. The more particulates that you can remove, little bits of grass and dirt and wood, because you won't see them, but every little bit of particulate that you can take out is refuge that microorganisms will not have. So the finer you can filter that out, the better. Whether you're using a T-shirt or some cheesecloth, refine that water as best as you can, and then from there, for 1 gallon of water, it should be 1 teaspoon of bleach, and that should be allowed to set for at least 30 minutes. That's very important. That you make sure you give, and I'm glad that you brought that up, Walt, because I've made that mistake before, and a lot of people have, not giving chlorine enough time to kill the organisms. And it doesn't have to be just chlorine. You can also use iodine. There are different kinds of iodine for campers and hikers. You can buy little tablets that will also kill the organisms. But still, you should give it 30 minutes. Otherwise, you can be dealing with those gastrointestinal issues.
Someone in the chat brought up something called GSE for killing parasites in water. Do you know anything about that?
GSE does not ring a bell. If I had it, maybe if I heard it through a different name, I might understand, but I've never heard of GSE.
Okay. So to reiterate, it's critically important to wait a certain amount of time if you're going to add some kind of a bleach or chlorine derivative to the water in order to kill the parasites and the microorganisms that exist in dirty or stagnant water.
Yeah, I'll share my story very quickly because this really illustrates the whole picture. My pool in my backyard, my family and I, it was a couple of years ago in August. We'd gone away. I forgot to put the cover on the pool. We had some storms. Come back, everything's green and it's got like little bugs and lots of stuff in there.
Fernando, hold it right there. We're coming up to the last break. Continue with this anecdote on the other side of the break in the last segment. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about survival, which is your main forte. And we'll probably want to bring you on the show again in the future to talk about survival skills. So we're talking with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. We'll be right back for the last segment after these words. Welcome back, everyone. This is the final segment for this edition of What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. My website, whatonearthishappening.com. We're talking today with water purification expert Fernando Salguero. And Fernando, you were just going into a personal anecdote about pool water that you had dealt with.
And silver, the role of silver and the role of chlorine in organisms.
Yes.
So I had allowed my pool, because I'd gone away over the summer, I'd allowed my pool to go all skunky and green. So it got time to clean it out. So I poured a bag of pool shock in, which is complex chlorine. And after about 5 minutes, I mixed it around, and then I got in with the net, and I began to swim around. And it was a hot night, and it felt good. And so I walked around with the net, and I'm scooping out little bits of leaves and such. About a couple days later, I noticed these little tiny white spots popping up, mostly on my lower half, where I had more contact with the water. After about 2 weeks, I was covered, especially in my lower half, by what's called hot tub folliculitis. It's a particular bacteria that infects hair follicles. And so all over my feet, legs, stomach, chest, my hands and wrists, and oh God, on my scrotum, I was loaded with these very painful pus packs coming out of my these infections coming out of my hair follicles. I went to several different mainstream doctors. They gave me prescriptions for antibiotics that never did anything to cure the sickness. And after years of going to these doctors, I went and took it into my own hands, and I found colloidal silver, and colloidal silver knocked it out like no antibiotic ever could. And so I have not had any of those issues with folliculitis for a few years now. But that was an important lesson. I'm glad Walt brought up about the amount of time allowed. I should have allowed 30 minutes, and I would have saved myself a tremendous volume of pain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions in the chat that you might want to take? If not, I wanted to basically talk about Survive and Thrive a little bit.
Yeah, let's go on to Survive and Thrive.
Okay, so this is your skill share that you have put together here in Philadelphia, and why don't you tell people a little bit about what it is, what you do there, and how they might want to get involved if they're in this region.
Okay. Well, I will mention that you are an assistant organizer for Survive and Thrive. And
Yes.
I'm also going to tell the public that you are one of the inspirations for Survive and Thrive. As I watch you put together your What on Earth is Happening presentation, and you actually gave one of your first presentations in my living room.
That's right.
As I watched your drive to get information into the hearts and minds of people while it still had time to make change, that planted a seed. And later, that seed really germinated when I was doing some important medicine work with dimethyltryptamine. Myself, I follow a more shamanic path of understanding the physical and metaphysical worlds and their relations. And I was given a very powerful vision of creating I'd been a closet prepper all of my life. I've always been ready for blips and whatever, disruptions. But I'd always been very quiet about it. Never shared that information with anyone around me, except my immediate family. So this medicine work, I was given a vision of empowering the feminine aspect of our culture. I saw visions of single mothers being able to provide water for their thirsting children. Pictures of women being able to care for elderly parents in grid down and grid teetering situations. So I started Survive and Thrive with the help of you and Barb and a number of others. We are now pushing about 600 members. It's a skill-sharing collective made up of a wide variety of folks. And we all come in, and we all learn, and we all teach. Or not all of us teach. But so we teach everything from understanding basics of natural law and sovereignty in relation to your own survival. Own your DNA. Own yourself. Resist enslavement through various means that include the GMO or what else gets put into your body. There are a lot of things like that we touch on. We also talk about the basics of how to purify water, how to gather it, how to find it. Fire, how to heat your home without the grid, how to start fires with no matches, how to use alcohol as an alternative fuel, which creates no carbon monoxide if you burn alcohol in a closed-in space. We teach wildland survival skills, how to make traps and snares, how to do fishing in different ways. So really just a wide gamut of survival skills, grid down skills. We do sheltering in place. We do understanding hazmat. I am also a Montgomery County, Pennsylvania firefighter. I've been a firefighter since 2002. I'm a well-trained firefighter, so I try to pass a lot of my hazmat training along to folks, a lot of my basic fire training. That includes ropes and knots and how to deal with a wide variety of situations. So we deal, Survive and Thrive is always free. There's no profit ever. And we really do help a lot of people. We have meetings that are once or twice a month. The next one is a wild foods and medicinal tour for our plant and tree identification. So we do a lot of wild foods identification, growing food in small spaces, how to store food by canning or jerking or different methods of drying, how to grow sprouts. Growing sprouts right there, so simple and can make the difference between life and death. I mean, sprouting just for using in a juicer.
That's right. As a matter of fact, I just did sprouts in the juices that we made on this fast. And sprouts are high protein. They're high nutrient density foods. People should definitely look into sprouts. It's something I haven't mentioned much, but we're going to talk about them.
And it's an excellent survival strategy. If one has the functional instinct for self-preservation, which not everyone does, and that's okay. It's okay to check out. But for those who are not willing to check out without a fight, it's an excellent survival strategy. You know, you talk a lot about a lot of different things, and one of the things I respect about you and your work, Mark, is the esoteric, bigger picture.
Yes.
When I talk to other people about you and your website, I tell them how you and I met at a 9/11 Truth meeting on Easter Sunday a few years ago. And I tell them that when I met Mark Passio, I already had a lot of the dots, and I had them connected in some way. But you pointed to me some outlying dots in the big picture, and then connected them all with a sacred geometric pattern that made perfect sense. So that's really, I think that right there, the freedom of consciousness, is probably the most important thing we have going for us. But there are those that are out to enslave us, and I personally believe that there are hard and soft kill operations. Soft kill operations in the form of small, steady ways that sicken us, weaken our wills, and deteriorate our health. Hard kill operations are more direct blood sacrifice, more direct war, that are enacted by powers that be, groups, entities that are bent on manipulation for malevolent means. So anything that I can do to help raise people's consciousness, help you do your work, help others do their work, as long as it's moving in the same direction. I'm dedicated to living the rest of my life that way.
Fernando, that is phenomenal, and unfortunately that's all the time we have for this edition. Thanks so much for being a great guest on What on Earth is Happening. We'll be sure to bring you back to talk about survival skills on a future show. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to check out Survive and Thrive, meetup.com/Survive and Thrive Philadelphia region. Put dashes in between those words, okay? Or just search for Survive and Thrive on meetup.com. That's all we have time for this week, folks. We'll see you next week right here on What on Earth is Happening. Stick around. Chris Everard is up next.
Across the sands of time, from